Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everybody, and welcome to Pangolin, the conservation podcast, the show dedicated to exploring and amplifying the world's underappreciated conservation stories. The stories that inspire me, and I hope will inspire you too. I'm your host, Jack Baker, and welcome to the fourth episode of this year's Pangolin Pride celebration. Our five-part series celebrating the incredible role that the LGBTQ plus community play in conservation and nature spaces. Today, we are turning our focus to the wonderful world of birds with the brilliant Alex Berryman, Senior Red List Officer for BirdLife International. Alex is also a member of the IUCN SSC Asian Songbird Trade Specialist Group and sits on the BirdLife Taxonomic Working Group. And so there is so many amazing, wonderful, incredible, interesting things to discuss. So thank you so much for joining us today, Alex. Thank you so much.
Wonderful to be here.
No, thank you. Genuinely, thank you so much for making the time to be here. It's absolutely fabulous, and I say this to everybody who doesn't study mammals because I need to thank you because I'm so often accused of having a mammal bias. So thank you for helping me to slowly change that perception. Maybe.
I think I think that happens to everyone who works on a particular group. Bird people get told off all the time for only talking about birds. So
I mean, I think it's
yeah,
fair though. I think it's fair. I feel like birds is less probably persecuted than. I mean, realistically, we all need to work with something weirder, like
yeah.
some strange, unusual amphibian or reptile, and then people will be happy. Maybe. Um, no, that's brilliant. I guess like I always start the episodes by kind of listing off people's CVs. But obviously, there's more to you than is just he's this and he's this and he's this. So, would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners and maybe tell us a little bit more about you and what you do?
Sure. I mean, you covered it quite well. So yeah, my job title is Senior Red List Officer. So in practice, what that means is my role. I mean, I suspect most of your listeners have heard of the IUCN Red List, where you try and kind of infer the extinction risk of species. My core job is to I guess, to collate all the information for bird assessments in Asia and the Pacific. Yeah, so as you can imagine, that's quite a big job. So that takes up a kind of quite large component of my time. And then on top of that, I maintain kind of broad interests in threatened species research. So I spend quite a bit of time doing that. I'm really interested in poorly known bird species and trying to find out more about them and kind of better trying to infer their extinction risk when we know so little about them. I'm very interested in taxonomy, so I publish a fair bit on working out what is a species, what is not a species. And then increasingly, I also do a fair bit of work on bird trade and informing or trying to convert some of BirdLife's data into things we can use for CITES, which is the kind of international multilateral agreement we use to try and control trade. But I guess one of the great things about my job is that I get to work with loads of cool people and I get sucked into all kinds of weird and wonderful side quests.
Yes, I can imagine with an area that is so large to cover and such a diverse kind of role within that area. Yeah, the side quests are numerous and probably each of them could probably be a job on its own.
A
like
hundred, oh,
yeah.
100%. Yeah, you can get an email that derails you for a week, but I
Yeah.
quite like that. It keeps a job pretty varied.
Yep. I like that. And I cannot wait to learn all about that. But I always like to, before we get fully into like what you do now, I always am intrigued by how people get to where they are and how people get kind of into that space, right? Like, because I think, especially in conservation and nature spaces, people come from so many different places. There's so many weird and wonderful ways that people have become inspired. And so I wonder, like, what is it that kind of led you into this space? What is it kind of that made you fall in love with birds and want to work with birds? Where did that kind of interest come from for you?
Yeah, I always, people ask me this quite a bit, and I wish I had a slightly more interesting story. And that other people seem to have this amazing tale of how
Hmm.
they were raised by cassowaries or something insane.
Hmm.
I was just kind of interested in wildlife from a very young age. I don't know exactly where that came from. I was like loads of people, I guess, just kind of interested and intrigued by Attenborough documentaries and kind of local natural history museums. And I guess that was always kind of me from the age of 9 or 10, I suppose. And then for a fair while, I wanted to be a herpetologist. I was obsessed with frogs. Again, no idea where that came from. And then I pivoted to birds, I guess, when I was about 13, 14. I remember my dad and I going on a walk kind of run by the council, and this guy was giving a kind of dawn chorus walk around our local area, and he could pick out every single bird that was singing and calling. And I thought that was the really cool kind of superpower. And so I think that kind of precipitated it. But exactly what drove that, I'm not sure. And then I was kind of a fanatic bird watcher, as I still am. Then went to university. I went to UEA, which is where every sort of UK aspiring ornithologist who's also a manic birder goes, because the birding around the Norfolk Broads and the North Norfolk coast is so great. Um, so I went there, and then that's at universities where I kind of really took an interest in the tropics and decided that I wanted to specialize in the tropics rather than, I mean, a load of my kind of contemporaries went to do stuff in the UK. I decided that I was more interested in tropical biology. And then, yeah, that was it. I specialized very early and kind of very hard. I went fully into Southeast Asian birds was going to be my thing. And I would just kind of find a way of turning that into a job rather than what I think a lot of people do. And I think it's sort of a mistake of staying very broad and then not quite knowing where they want to end up and just hoping it will fall into place. I kind of did it in reverse and specialized very early on.
Yes, I know, but I feel like there's different ways of doing it. I think it's fair to go
Yeah,
either
yeah,
direction. Yeah, yeah,
both work. My doing it the way I did it is more of a gamble, and I think often it might not work out. But I was very lucky in that the skills I had, few as they may be, were demanded by BirdLife at the right time. So yeah.
yeah, yeah. And like, I would. What was it that? Because so like, yeah, growing up, looking at the bird, going out, going on this walk, like being inspired by the birds that were around you. What was it that then when you were like, oh, this particular area of the world, was there a species? Was there a particular animal, or was it just like, no, I'm just curious about this? Like,
So at university, I didn't travel much as a kid at all. My parents always holidayed in the UK. So when I was at university, I decided I would travel quite a bit. And so I spend all my term time working and saving money to buy flights for the kind of summer holidays. And I went all over. So I did a few weeks driving around Colombia. I studied in Australia for a year as part of my degree, which was awesome. And that, I think, is where I latched on to the idea of working with threatened species. I worked with Regent Honeyeater, which is a kind of very poorly known, slightly nomadic Australian species that's critically endangered. And then from there, because it was closest, I would go to Asia quite a bit. And I just sort of fell in love with that part of the world. As much its birds as its culture and food, and at the time cheapness, because I was a student and I had no money. So you could live for sort of $5 a day, fine, and just go birding. And then I went to Borneo. I suspect Borneo is what really tipped me towards specializing in that. I spent a few weeks kind of hitchhiking around Borneo, and that was great. And yeah, I suppose that's what made me fall in love with the kind of Asian forests.
mhm. I think that's fair. I think that makes sense, especially when like I can imagine whenever I have been around like birders or people who love birds, like the entry point, like
They're all weird.
I wasn't gonna say that is not. That is nowhere near what I was gonna say. I mean, I'm not gonna say you're incorrect, but that's not what I was gonna say. What I was gonna say was, um, like I can imagine the appeal of $5 a day to watch birds, given like the entry cost of binoculars, cameras, all of these things. Whenever I see them, I'm like, oh, you have to really be into birds to want to like, yeah, to be
Yeah,
into birds. Yeah.
and the thing is that when you're at university in Australia, they would kick
Hmm.
you out for 3 months of the year, like they
Oh,
kind of do at the UK. But
yes.
I didn't really want to go home, so I had 3 months with not very much money, and staying in Australia would actually be far more expensive than it was to get cheap flights to Asia. And then I used to just hitchhike around and stay in these really terrible hostels and sleep on people's floors. Um, But it was a lot of fun. Yeah, it didn't put me off somehow. I was always a fairly fearless traveller, even though I'm not particularly like that when I'm in the UK. But
No, the stories, sometimes the best stories are the ones that you're like, I'll tell people about this afterwards. Yep.
there's a lot of
Like,
those. Yeah,
yep.
there's a lot of stories my parents will never know.
Well, back to the stories that your parents definitely can know about, which is probably your very established career at BirdLife. So you go and you adventure, and you do all those things, you find that interest, and then how do you end up kind of back at BirdLife, and like, yeah, what is it that? And for people who don't know that organization, maybe it would be good to introduce a little bit about what they do as well.
Sure. So my, I guess, journey to BirdLife was somewhat accidental in that
Mhm.
my travelling it didn't so much get cut short as I ran out of money because of COVID, but the two did
Yep.
kind of coincide. It was
Hmm.
about, I think I came back late February 2020, which by that point in Southeast Asia, things were hotting up a bit, let's say, and there were temperature guns everywhere. So I came home and I lived with my parents for a bit. And as much as I love my parents, I knew I needed to not do that for too much longer. And then a job came up at BirdLife where it was Red List assistant, I think was my first job. And the job spec was effectively really just after someone who approached things scientifically and who knew about birds. And so that kind of fitted me quite well. And I landed that job. I think originally with the idea of then not sticking at it for too long and going and doing something else. But I
Hmm.
now I'm at the position where I tell people I suspect I will probably retire from BirdLife in as much as I imagine I'll be here my whole career. So it's kind of funny how those things can work out. In terms of BirdLife, sure, I think people often think it's quite a small kind of fringe organization. I think maybe because it doesn't have a huge profile outside of bird people. Um, but actually, I mean, it's a pretty big organization. So it comprises of a global team, which is the team I'm part of. I can go into what we do a bit in a minute. And then the partnership, which I guess is the kind of core idea of BirdLife. So we're a partnership organization. We have just over 120 conservation organizations within that partnership in a I think it's now just under 120 countries. I think it's 119 countries. A handful of countries have more than one partner, but otherwise it's normally one for one. And the idea there is that a national organization knows how best to deliver conservation in their country on the ground, and also to try and deliver policy and advocacy wins via their government. They know that best. Um, and then collectively, that effort can kind of contribute to the global progress we want to see and the kind of sustainable goals we have. So that's I guess, the idea of BirdLife and how it works. The global team, we sort of have a number of different functions. So our fundraising global team might help certain partners raise money. We have a policy team who might represent BirdLife and the BirdLife partnership at these kind of big international events where multilateral environmental agreements are kind of signed and negotiated. And then we have the global science team, which is where I sit. And we do a range of things, so including what I do with a Red List authority for birds. So BirdLife International, as an organization, is responsible for delivering Red List assessments for all the world's birds every few years. It's a kind of dynamic, extinction risk is a dynamic kind of projection, so it needs updating every few years. We also help partners identify and monitor the kind of key sites for biodiversity in their country, and kind of collate and monitor those data sets. So I guess that's what BirdLife does. It's a very science-led organization, so we try and make sure that science underpins our kind of conservation and advocacy throughout everything we do.
Yes. Yep. And just a small list of things. Just really not much at all going on
Yeah, and
there.
I've missed, though. I'm sure if any of my colleagues listen to this, they'll be mad I didn't mention what they do. I mean, there's so many people doing such wonderful work. Yeah, it's a huge organization, really, and so many brilliant people doing really great work.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And then and that, yeah, I can't even, yes, I feel like I could have done a whole series of just different people and different places and different things that they work, just talking to members of the BirdLife team. So that's,
I'm
yeah,
sure.
maybe something to talk about For listeners, Alex was very kindly volunteered by previous guest of the podcast, Julia. Cannot remember what episode that was. Go back and listen to it. Go scroll backwards, find it, so I can chat to her and be like, "Oh, if you've got any more staff members you'd like to throw my way who'd like to add even more to the list of things that BirdLife does, you are more than welcome to." No, that is amazing, and I really like that idea, right? Of like, because I think so often conservation is done in a way where people kind of go into a place, do the work, back out, having thinking they understand the place, thinking they understand the people, thinking they understand the nature of the place. And maybe they do to a certain level and a certain degree, but having those partnerships and having that collaboration must be so beneficial to everyone involved, right? Because there's such a sharing of knowledge and skills, and then you can share those things globally by being that central point for people. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is the way to deliver conservation effectively and long term. It comes with challenges. I mean, some of our partners vary massively in size. So I don't know whether this is still true, but it definitely was true at a time that our partner in Iceland consisted of, I think, one or two people. I should think our partner in the Cook Islands, I shouldn't think they have more than 5 staff, but I apologize if you do. I should think they're very, very small. Compare that to, say, the RSPB, which is the BirdLife partner in the UK, the Audubon Society in the US, BirdLife Australia, BirdLife South Africa. They're all BirdLife partners, and they're all massive organizations that exceed at least some of them exceed the number of staff that the BirdLife global team has. I mean, the RSPB certainly vastly exceeds that. So that is a challenge in terms of some partners really do lack the capacity. And I guess part of our job is to try and raise that capacity so that they can deliver what their kind of bigger scale plans are.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's really interesting. That's really, yeah, really, really interesting. And because when you think about it, it's kind of like, RSPB is the big bird. Like if you're thinking in UK bird conservation, it's RSPB. So like, that's like that to be the partner of them must be interesting. Is they're
It's a
kind of
strange, kind
yeah.
of strange power dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's interesting though. And it must be a really exciting kind of, especially working with so many organizations of different sizes, such a dynamic, shifting kind of interesting thing, as you've said. I wonder then, kind of like, with your role, you kind of described it there and a minute ago with like how you sit in your kind of focus. So just to kind of give a sense of like where you relate to all of these other bits of the puzzle, like who are you working, what is your kind of, yes,
you,
what are
you
you doing?
you could have just cut the question at what. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, well,
it's kind of like what.
yeah.
Yeah, so I sit in the global science team, and then within that I sit in the red list team, which I given I sit next to them nearly every day, I should know how many of them there are. I think there's 6 of us, but it
Okay.
sort of changes a bit. But there's about 6 of us, and then we have our sites team who look at identifying the kind of important sites. We then have like a marine team in the science team. We have people working on flyways. We have people working on ecosystem services. This is all just within the science team. So my main role is interacting, I guess, with other people in the science team. So the red list, I guess its reputation is just a list of species that are threatened. In reality, it is a huge database of all kinds of things, both the obvious things in terms of population size, population trend, range maps, and the kind of things that I guess people expect the red list to do because that's how you infer extinction risk. But also, we have huge amounts of information on habitat, on threats, on necessary conservation actions. And our job as red list assessors essentially is to try and collate all of that information. So even though we collate that information, there's other people both within our team, both outside our team, and people in other organizations who want to use that data for other purposes. So we kind of get to interact with loads of people in the science team. And then particularly the policy teams as well. So the policy teams who go to these kind of big international conferences and negotiate these various agreements and contribute to that, their role is to kind of use science to underpin what they're doing. And so our job is to try and, as the experts of those data, to try and feed them exactly what is going on and try and simplify it. Because I mean, our data sets are large and slightly unwieldy and not always totally intuitive.
But I don't think I was going to say I don't think that is a unique problem. I feel like across sites and organizations that is something that everybody is like, oh, we have all of this, and you go, oh wow, okay, that is almost too much for me to work with. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that is a common thing. If we send someone some data and they ask us whether we can delete 80% of the columns
Fair.
so they can understand it. Yeah.
Well, actually, this leads quite nicely into something I was going to ask about, because in the kind of run up to this interview, you sent across a couple articles that were really useful to kind of get some context about what you do. And I think like what's quite interesting, and maybe like it seems like a silly question, right? Because as people who work within the field, we know and we are quite familiar with the red list and all of the information that's in there. But kind of keeping track of all of this and keeping track of as things are kind of discovered or kind of go missing, or these like what, like there's so much in there that like it's such an important thing to do. However, like I feel like a lot of people, when they encounter things like that on the ground, if you're kind of just a person listening to this who maybe goes to zoos or goes out into nature, you maybe see the like red list kind of symbol for endangered or vulnerable or things on a sign somewhere or whatever, but maybe don't appreciate quite how much is in there and why it's important to know all of this. Like, what is it like? Why is it so important to keep track of all this information and kind of know all of this? And how does that kind of process work? Like that would be really interesting to know more about.
Yeah,
If that's not too big of a question, like
it is quite a big question. I think there's
yeah.
possibly sort of 5 questions in one there. But if I
Yeah.
tackle at least first the one about why is it important, because actually I
Yes.
think something that conservationists we don't always do brilliantly is, I think, because we're so motivated by our cause, we sometimes forget that we do have a kind of role to justify why what we're doing is so important and why people should support us. I think broadly the public are very sympathetic to what we do, but I do think we kind of could do a better job of explaining this. So I guess, I mean, from my perspective at least, one of the ultimate objectives of nature conservation is to stop species going extinct as a result of human activity. That's kind of a fundamental aim that we have. It's also a fundamental aim that various countries have now signed up to. And so there's a kind of important focus there. And the red list is still the most standardized, most widely accepted way of working out which species have gone extinct. We can maybe come back to that in a minute. That's a really interesting idea of when you can declare something extinct, but also trying to predict, basically, which is what the red list is doing, which species are most likely to go extinct next. Now, one common misconception is that that means we should plow all our funding into critically endangered species, and it's a kind of step down approach that, yeah, the most threatened species should always get the most funding. That is a very simplistic way of looking at things, and the IUCN themselves, I think it's like sentence 1 of paragraph 1 of the IUCN Red List guidance says, don't do this. There are all kinds of other things to take into account when prioritizing what gets funding and what gets conservation action. You know, there's things, certain countries may have national priorities. There's feasibility and kind of actual ability to deliver to take into account. But if you're looking at extinction risk, the IUCN Red List is a really useful way of doing this and working out which species are most likely to kind of, which species are most likely to go extinct. So that would be my kind of most coherent answer, I guess, of why this is important. It's also fundamental to understanding just how much damage we're doing to the planet and how much damage we're doing to biodiversity more broadly. So you can, our chief scientist, a guy called Stu Butchart, he pioneered this index called the Red List Index. I won't go into lots of detail about it because it's not super interesting to explain. But the idea of that is looking at changes in extinction risk over time, and that's a really useful monitoring tool we can use. Unsurprisingly to listeners, it basically shows that things are getting worse, which won't surprise anyone. But it's a very, very useful index of looking at changes in combined extinction risk over time. And then the second part of that is that it's also very useful for us to understand which species have gone extinct. I always forget how many countries have signed up to the Convention on Biological Diversity. But I mean, one of its key targets, I think it's target 4, is to halt species extinction. Well, we can't really know whether we're delivering that unless we are monitoring it in some way. So yeah, a big part of what we do, it's maybe the more morbid part of what I do, is working out which species and when we should declare extinct.
Hmm. That's, I mean, and you, I mean, like, I feel like you've done a nice little loop there. Of you've said we can maybe talk about that later, and then you've looped perfectly back to it. So I need to ask is like in the because it might be morbid, but it's interesting. Is
Yeah.
how do you begin to unpack that? Like,
So, I mean, people have been grappling with this problem for, I mean, 100 years of working out what species have gone extinct. Um, there was for a time this view that if a species hasn't been seen for 50 years, we should declare it extinct. For all kinds of reasons, that's wholly inadequate. There are species rediscovered, including birds, which are probably the best known taxonomic group. There are birds that have been rediscovered in the last 5 years that hadn't been seen for 150 years before that. So having a 50-year cutoff doesn't work. So we have to try and infer it from other things. So what we look at, and what the IUCN now recommends for all taxa, birds are still the only group we've kind of really applied this to in a kind of large scale. We look at three things. So we look at records. So when was the bird last seen? We look at surveys, which is how hard have people actually looked for this thing. Now, that's kind of the most interesting and the most fundamental. If a species hasn't been seen for 50 years, but no one's looked for it, it doesn't really prove anything. So, yeah, how hard people have looked for it. And then also trying to come up with that for a species to go extinct, a threat must have driven it to extinction. So, considering what actually is by what mechanism did this species go extinct, basically. So we kind of look at all those three things. We do some exceedingly complicated maths that it was kind of introduced in a model a few years ago before I started at BirdLife. And in the last 5 years, I still have struggled to really wrap my head around it. But it does seem to give you a coherent output, and it does give you answers that are very sensible, i.e., if something hasn't been seen for a long time, but no one has looked for it, it tells you not to declare it extinct. If people have put in loads of effort and there's very obvious threats that could have driven it extinct, it tells you that those species are extinct. So that's kind of how we do it. It leans on, the IUCN often gets criticized for not declaring species extinct when they are. The models do lean definitely to that view. They lean to the perspective that we should not declare a species extinct prematurely. And I would agree with that. There's kind of two errors you could make. You either declare a species extinct and it isn't, or you don't declare a species extinct and it is. There was a really great paper, I think it was 1998, by actually my colleague Nigel Collar, in which he described this thing called the Romeo error. And that is that you declare a species extinct when it's still out there. You then, in the years after that, you don't do anything because you think it's extinct. Because by declaring something extinct, you're basically telling conservationists, give up on this. It's gone. Don't bother. So you declare a species extinct. So you then give up on it. But actually, the species is still there. And in those years you gave up on it, you could have implemented conservation action. And then it actually does go extinct for real. So that's the Romeo error, in that you indirectly cause extinction by declaring something extinct when it shouldn't be, if that makes sense.
yes, based on, and I'm now like Romeo as in Romeo because Romeo was not.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's, I mean,
Yeah.
beautiful naming convention as well.
It
The
is.
branding on that is strong. Yeah.
Nigel is by training an English scholar, so he has a very good way with words like that. But that's the kind of fundamental idea, and that is what conservationists, we're basically really scared of doing, is declaring something extinct when we shouldn't. So we tend to lean precautionarily a bit the other way. And so there definitely are species that I'm sure are extinct that we haven't yet declared extinct. And we're either missing the data, but that's normally the case, that we're just missing the data. Not enough people have been looking for it.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and like I yes, it must be really interesting having these moments of like being having to monitor all of that data and having to look across it all and having to keep track of all of this stuff and all of these various things. It must be one of those things that's simultaneously very exciting, but also oh no, now I have to work out all of this and where this is coming. When something turns up after a while, or something when these things magically turn up again after however many years. I think one of the article was something like 10 years, things just reappear again, and then that must be inspiring and wonderful and happy. Yay, it's not gone extinct, but also okay, now what do we do? Like there's
Yeah, there's kind of two. I mean, some species reappear that we had no doubt were there. So, they might have only been missing for 15 years. It's some remote mountain range in New Guinea that no one had visited in 15 years. When they were seen 15 years ago, they were living their best life. We can monitor through remote sensing data that the forest is still there. You can kind of infer the bird is fine. Like there's no real reason to be concerned. So when those species pop up again, we kind of just not shrug. I mean, it's still interesting, but it is kind of underwhelming. And
mm-hmm.
newspapers love to kind of go rediscovered and make it sound super exciting. In reality, in those situations, I'm not particularly excited. I just kind of think, oh well, yes, had anyone gone there, they would have found it, and
Yeah.
we were never telling anyone it wasn't there. But I mean, some of them are so exciting. So black-browed babbler was the one that was just nuts. It was known from a single specimen collected somewhere in Borneo. We didn't really know where. We had narrowed it down to southern Borneo. That was about it. And that was collected. It was either 1850s or so. And then I remember I was birding on Shetland, and I got a WhatsApp message early one morning, and it was just a photo of this black-browed babbler. This was in 2022, so it was like 170 years that thing had been missing, and we knew nothing about it. We didn't know precisely when that one specimen was collected. We didn't know precisely where, and then it was just found in some limestone outcrop in Borneo, and that was the key. And what's amazing about that is, having gone missing for so long, we now know loads of places it's in, and it's doing absolutely fine. So it's transpired to not even be threatened. It was living remotely on these limestone casts that no one had bothered to look at. Incidentally, a couple of years earlier, there was an expedition team that went looking for it on a mountain range very close to it. They drove past the limestone and went into these mountains, but in doing so, they discovered 2 or 3 new bird species to science.
Okay, so it wasn't a complete loss. It wasn't
No, but they're still annoyed because
yeah.
they basically drove past where what they were looking for was. So those stories are so exciting, and a proper sort of you kind of get a warm fuzzy feeling inside you. If you're a weird birder, I'm sure the public don't get that when they read about it, but. Those rediscoveries are genuinely kind of amazing, particularly so for birds because there's so few of them. I'm sure other taxonomic groups get it, but there are some groups, and you sort of think, well, we didn't really know much about parasitic wasps anyway, so it's not that surprising they've been missing for that long. But with birds, we know so much about them, and we actually have such a good idea about where most of them are, what most of them do, how threatened most of them are, that these few kind of scattered mysteries left, when they're resolved, they're super exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is amazing, and I think like it's a really nice example. It reminded me a lot of like so I used to work in a botanic garden, and then one of the stories that always really like gets me is the one of the Wollemi pine, where it's like it was, oh, we have to, like, oh, this is endangered, one of the most endangered trees, we need to protect it, and then they found thousands, so many of them just hidden away somewhere. And like, there's still those threats, right? Of like, if there's a wildfire and they all burn down, disaster. But for the present, like it's fine. These things, just even things as big as a tree, can disappear. So a bird, it does not surprise me at all that they can, go a very long time without being noticed or written about. Or no, that's really really interesting. Really really interesting. I guess like before, I was going to ask about another one of the things that you do. Before we move on, I was going to say, is there any other stories or things where you're like, this is really interesting to do with this? Before you move away from it, I also want to mention this story because this is a good one. Or can I ask about songbirds? What are
I
you
mean,
thinking?
Black Brow Babble is the most interesting one.
Yeah.
there are kind of all sorts of other weird ones, but I suspect that probably is the most interesting one in terms of how nuts it is.
Yeah.
Hang on, give me 20 seconds to think if I can think of another one.
It's the one that has the best. I guarantee there's whatever one if you name another, it will not have quite as ridiculous a name as a babbler. Like that.
Oh, really? Well, there's things like fluffy backed tit babbler. That's good.
That's
That's
good.
that is a good name. Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it didn't go missing, so it isn't relevant at all. But yeah, that is a good name. Yeah. No, I think you can probably move on. I think that's probably the best
It's the
story.
best one. Fair,
Yeah.
fair. But no, I think like because that's a really interesting part of your work, and it's really, really interesting to kind of get more in depth, especially as someone who like I don't know a lot of this background. As like I always like these kind of conversations because I'm like it's like a one-on-one tuition as to what people do. So that's really interesting, really, really interesting, and the formula and everything, so interesting. But something else I did want to ask about, just because I am very conscious that the time goes by on these very, very quickly, is about your work with the Asian Songbird Trade Specialist Group, because I think like that's something we've never talked about, and I wondered if you could kind of talk a little bit about that group and like what the threat is there that it's kind of discussing. Like that's a really interesting kind of topic, I think, that probably deserves an entire episode of its own, but we can talk about now.
Sure. So, well, I'm going to kind of, I guess, introduce it by avoiding the question and saying that, I mean, the bird trade is kind of pervasive worldwide. So we actually, BirdLife led a kind of global review of this, and almost 50% of bird species, so that's, there was 11,000 extant bird species, and I think it was 45% of them at some point have turned up in trade. So this is a huge kind of global issue. Birds are traded for all kinds of reasons: food, clothing, medicine, sport, ornamentation. But the biggest one is the pet trade. And yeah, in Southeast Asia, this has got quite a lot of attention in recent years. It's definitely not a threat that's exclusive to Southeast Asia, but I think it probably would be fair to say this is kind of the epicenter of where this is a big problem. And it's particularly challenging in Indonesia, which I guess, again, is within Southeast Asia, the hotspot of this, in that keeping birds as pets has a kind of deep-rooted cultural significance that is very, very difficult for, a kind of Western perspective to try and get all high and mighty about and say how terrible this is and that they shouldn't do it. And that's one of the reasons it is such an interesting conservation issue, but also such a challenging one. You can imagine a bunch of people coming into the UK and telling people you can't keep cats and dogs anymore. That would not go down particularly well. So, yeah, there's a lot of sensitivity around how we need to address it, but the scale of the problem is enormous. And they're songbirds in particular. They're interested for the reason that they sing nicely. There's kind of songbird competitions where people will take their bird down. And I mean, individual birds that perform well in song contests can be worth thousands and thousands of dollars. It's big money in this, including various government officials have very expensive songbirds. So again, you can imagine the kind of challenge in approaching this from a legislative perspective is very difficult. But yeah, the classic statistic to kind of illustrate how big this problem is, it's quite hard to verify how true it is. All I can say is that I think it probably is true, is that on the island of Java, which is Indonesia's most densely populated island, it is estimated that there's more birds in cages than in the wild. And I can believe that to be entirely true. As I say, it's quite hard to verify. We know roughly how many are in cages, but it's quite hard to know exactly how many are in the wild. But yeah, I can definitely believe that to be true. And walking around a songbird market in Jakarta, or a bird market in Jakarta, it's not just songbirds, is just about the most viscerally morbid, grim thing a conservationist can do. I'd encourage people who are interested in the issue to do it, as long as you kind of go in with the right perspective of it, because it is quite interesting as an experience to kind of get a handle on what's going on. This isn't just in Jakarta, I should say. I mean, where people go on holiday in Bali, around Denpasar, where some of the big clubs is. Just around the back is an enormous bird market. I occasionally go and survey it sort of early in the morning, and there's drunk Australians staggering home. So it is very close to where tourists go. Um, and so there's all kinds of challenges with this. One is the obvious one that a lot of these birds are being taken from the wild. We know it has driven species extinct. Javan pied starling is an extraordinary example. It's a species that at one time was possibly one of the most abundant species on Java. It doesn't need very much. It just occurs in kind of agricultural fields. It will have benefited massively from forest loss across Java, and kind of did very well in agricultural space. And then, as far as we know, it's extinct in the wild. They every single one of them has been trapped out, and there's millions of them in cages on Java, millions of them. Um, so that's a kind of extreme example, but we know lots of other species, Javan green magpie, various other Javan subspecies, that are basically on the brink of extinction because birds have been taken from the wild at such a kind of scale that it's just incompatible. So, it's just not sustainable. So that's one problem. You then have the animal rights perspective of it all, in birds being crammed into tiny cages, a lot of them not surviving the journey if they're being moved or just being kept in cages. So there's that perspective of it that I guess is challenging. There's also issues surrounding disease, and a paper I've actually submitted in the last few weeks about invasive alien species, and the fact that there's now about 40 or 50 uh, Indonesian species on islands in Indonesia that they shouldn't be on, but they've been moved around because of this trade. They've escaped from songbird markets. In some cases, we know that government authorities have seized birds and then thought they were doing the right thing by releasing them back into the wild, but they've released them on the wrong island. So there's all kinds of, it's a web of conservation challenges, this, and it really is very, very difficult to address. It's also very easy to get very gloomy about it, because it's just all people see are these horrid images of these huge bird markets with hundreds of thousands of birds in a single market. Um, there is conservation action that's worked, I think, but the tale of Barley Minor, which is such an iconic species, you see it in various kind of conservation focused zoos in the UK, and it's got a lot of profile in years. I mean, that species has kind of gone extinct in the wild repeatedly. With people would release some birds to try and get a wild population going. Trappers would take them out, and we were just stuck in this cycle. The latest count is that there's several hundred birds doing pretty well, and that's largely the result of quite effective conservation action, and also teaching people, or rather they worked it out themselves, how to breed barley miners in captivity at such a scale that it was so much cheaper and more effective to breed them in captivity rather than taking birds from the wild. So that's proven very effective in terms of it's addressed the problem of birds being taken from the wild, and it meets the demand from local people that at least a proportion of them want a pet barley miner. So that's worked. Our partner in Indonesia is an organization called Burung Indonesia, and they've done really great work locally, at least, in kind of getting communities to stop trapping. I think the next challenge is how do we scale that up? And I think that's going to be the kind of challenge. But yeah, that's just an example, and I'm definitely not pinning all the blame on Indonesia. This is a problem for, I mean, Vietnam. It seems to be getting worse and worse, and increasingly there's kind of cross-border trade from Laos into Vietnam, China into Vietnam. There's Vietnamese species turning up in Indonesian markets all the time. Um, so these are complex issues, and we've also actually been discussing this week with colleagues in South America about Spirophila seed eaters, which are this group of small kind of black finch-like birds, and trade of them in South America is proving completely unsustainable as well. So yeah, there's a kind of gloomy overview of what it is, but I mean, there's some positive news stories in there. I think the challenge now is how do we upscale them?
Yes, yeah. Because as you were talking, I was kind of going like, there's sometimes on the podcast where I have people on, and I will be like, "Yeah, I intrigued and I would support any work that goes on there. But I'm very glad this isn't my web of problems to try and unpick, because that's a lot, and that's dense, and that is like, yeah, there's a
It's
lot there. Yeah.
it's also a conservation problem that actually really reflects why BirdLife's model of doing conservation, you can see very quickly how that is most appropriate, in that this is a very sensitive problem with a lot of kind of cultural sensitivities around it, and having a local partner who can try and deliver these conservation wins is so much more effective than having you or I or someone from Cambridge going in and trying to fix the problem,
Yeah.
which will not work.
No, no. That's yeah. Yeah. It really It proves the model. I wonder, like, I know you said there are wins, there are good news kind of stories. I wonder if we can, like, is there any that you are kind of like, oh, this is a good example of where we were able to make like change or difference, or kind of begin to unpick something, even like.
I can give one that is sort of effective, other than the fact I can't really remember the really fine detail of it. So listeners will have to forgive me if they go and
Mhm.
Google something and they come up with a different number.
Okay.
But so our partner, Burung Indonesia, they worked very closely, are still working very closely with a few villages and communities in the North Moluccas in Indonesia, and really trying to address parrot trade. Kind of, I guess, unsurprising that parrots are very heavily traded. Um, and so they kind of did various surveys before they started their interventions, and found that huge numbers of villagers in these villages had, particularly the bird they were catching was something called chattering lorry, which is a fantastic kind of bright red parrot species. And they found that in loads of these villages, people had these pet lorries, and then on top of that, we're no doubt catching more and then trading them and exporting them. And there's been some really successful kind of interventions they've made, looking at alternative livelihoods, and often just trying to educate people about the impact that what they might perceive as having kind of no impact is actually having a global impact on the conservation status of this species. Um, and anyway, it's proven remarkably successful. And I was actually on the island of Bachan 2 or 3 years ago on holiday. These kind of weird, wonderful holidays I go on. And visit. I was in one of the villages, and we walked around the whole village, and we found one chattering lorry where I think previously they had counted like 30 or 40. So again, it's a question of how do we upscale that and how do we apply that broadly. But the story of barley mine is really good as well, in that that's one that, I mean, that has effectively saved the species from going extinct again. And as long as that can be maintained and that population trajectory can be sustained, I mean, that's a species that won't be critically endangered by the end of this decade if it keeps up.
Yeah. Which is a huge win. A huge win. Like,
It's something that would have been unthinkable even 10, 15 years ago. So yeah, we kind of have to concentrate on those wins and prove that I mean, conservation works. I mean, there's been all kinds of good papers on this, that conservation does work. And particularly where we have tried and tested methods, the next step is just how do we operationalize this? And again, having local partners to deliver that is especially useful.
yeah. Yeah, no, that's really interesting, and I think it's a nice, like, I know throughout this we have talked a lot about morbid or bad or scary or big challenge or hard challenge, but that is a nice, I think, a hopeful kind of proof of having the partners going with the method, using these things can ultimately pay off and work in the right direction. And I think that's a nice, yeah. I like, not to undermine any of the other important conversations and other problems we have discussed, because also important, but to begin to kind of move towards the, like, there's
Yeah.
a hopeful something there. I know that's really interesting, really interesting. And yeah, probably we've discussed 2 to 3 whole episodes worth of content there, and that's fascinating and interesting. And yeah, thank you very much for sharing all of those interesting stories. Yes, but I do think that it is perhaps time to ask you the questions that I ask and have asked every guest this series. You are the fourth person to answer them this series, and one of them you will be about the 100th person to answer, because I like asking similar questions to see kind of, yeah, the variation of result, like the variation of answers, the variation of stories, the variation of things. And so the question that I'm asking every single person this Pangolin Pride series is, of course, like we are here to celebrate LGBTQ plus stories within the conservation space. Um, However, there are a lot of people who look at this space and feel like they can't see themselves in it. They can't see the kind of place where they belong. They can't find exactly where they would fit. And so the question I'm asking everybody is, if there is someone listening to this who goes like, "Oh, that's all wonderful. That's all really interesting. I'd love to be involved, but this place isn't for me, or this isn't kind of a space for me," what would you say to somebody who's thinking like that just now?
It's a big question,
Yeah.
which is maybe an hour's answer in itself. It's it's a really important question. My very short answer would be that you absolutely do belong. I mean, it's a kind of cliche, but I think it's absolutely true with the conservation sector that it is a broad church, and it needs everyone in it to succeed. Um, and so I would hope that people don't see a particular sort of facet of themselves, i.e., their sexuality or whatever it may be, as a kind of barrier to their aspiration, because it really shouldn't be. I genuinely I can speak to working at BirdLife, but also I have friends and colleagues that work in various other conservation NGOs, and they are all genuinely very welcoming. Um, I appreciate that's not always a super helpful answer. And it's also steeped in a lot of bias in the fact that I'm a white gay man living in Cambridge. So there's a lot of kind of other challenges there. One of the really nice things, this would have been 3 years ago, we had a BirdLife 100th anniversary kind of Congress event. And we had a little pride stand at that. And representatives from all our partners all over the world were at this kind of event. And so many of them came up to us and sort of shared their own stories, including someone who said to me, "I'm gay, but that's the first time I've said it out loud," which almost made me cry.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
it's partly why I think I've always said that representation is so important. I think it's so challenging if you're a kind of young, aspiring conservationist to dream unless you can see someone who's at least a little bit like you there. It makes it really hard to see how that journey might play out. Um, and I think, unfortunately, you might not always find that person to kind of be your guide through it. And unfortunately, in those situations, the best thing you can do is kind of keep pushing and trust the process that you definitely do belong. Um, the other thing I would briefly say is something I always hate is this idea that there's a kind of gay or a queer stereotype. It doesn't really mean anything. Um, you can be gay and do whatever you want. There's no kind of rule book about how to be queer. I mean, that's kind of the whole point of it, is that as a community we accept everyone. So I kind of believe that, or I hope that people don't see their sexuality as a barrier to what they want to go and do, because there's no reason it should be. Um, yeah.
No, I think those are really interesting, perfect answers. And I think really nice because, like, yeah, I know we have a lot of our listeners come from the UK or the US. Well, both places where, yeah, I was going to say historically might have been a easier place to exist as a queer person, but maybe not so much now. Um, but a lot of listeners do come from around the world, where in places where perhaps it is more challenging to exist in as that person. And so it's actually really nice to hear that, like, in a space of people from 100 countries or however many countries it was, kind of around the world visiting, doing all of these kind of things, like for your anniversary, that people were all kind of, like all able to kind of appreciate the work that was going on there. And I think, like, yeah, that is something about the conservation space, is that, like, generally and yeah, genuinely, like in most spaces, like you'll always find those little corners of ignorance, but like, yeah, generally everybody who works in the space are very lovely people, are very kind people, and yeah, care about you as a person more than like anything else. So they are genuinely very supportive and lovely. So that's really nice, really good. And yeah, I probably would have broken down if I was on a stall and someone said that to me.
I mean, I
So
pretty much
yeah.
did. It was very sweet. The other thing that was nice with that is that even people who weren't saying things like that, or who were not themselves LGBT, but they would people from countries who maybe where you wouldn't get that kind of thing, I guess. You wouldn't have a pride stand at an event. You came along and were asking really interesting questions and trying to get a bit of understanding and perspective themselves, which is something we sometimes, I suspect, in the UK take for granted a bit. We kind of know roughly what pride is and what pride stands for. We could do with people knowing that better, but generally it's understood as a concept. In a lot of countries, that is not the case. And so I thought it was testament to the conservation sector internationally that people were interested in finding out about it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's a really nice, yeah, that is a really nice message. And yes, that's, yeah, less morbid than a lot of the discussions we've had. So that's good. That's good.
Yeah, yeah.
No, that's excellent. And I guess like moves us kind of nicely onto another question that I have that I've been asking everyone, which is of all. So I ask this every episode, and I feel like you're going to have a good answer because of the work that you do. So I'm not to put any pressure on, but every episode I ask people to name their favorite underappreciated creature, whether that be plant, animal, anything else. I ask for like, what is your favorite misunderstood, underappreciated creature? Alex, what would you say?
Okay. I mean, it has to be a bird. I'm definitely not
Yeah.
saying a plant. That would be sacrilege. So my answer is, if people think of New Guinea, they often think of birds of paradise and amazing birds with amazing displays, very colourful. Um, Whereas I think I'm obsessed with kingfishers. Kingfishers are my favourite group of birds, and there is a kingfisher in New Guinea called shovel-billed kookaburra, which is this huge kind of stolid-looking brown kingfisher with an enormous, like, as its name suggests, shovel like bill. And it spends its days. I mean, most shovel billed kookaburras have probably never seen permanent water in their lives. They've definitely, most of them, never eaten a fish. And they spend their time hopping around on the ground, and they basically use their bill as a plow to plow these like 30 by 30 centimeter plots of earth, digging them up for earthworms. And I think that's so cool compared to what at least Europeans would think is like the archetypal kingfisher, some sort of bright blue thing that just basically eats fish and aquatic invertebrates. Whereas, yeah, in New Guinea, there's this kind of amazing brown kingfisher that no one's ever heard of that's going around ploughing up earthworms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've just looked up a picture of it because I had never heard of it myself, and
It's
yes,
weird, isn't it?
it's bizarre. It like it doesn't look like it just doesn't look. It's not proportioned correct in my brain. It's a very
No,
strangely
it looks like
proportioned creature.
it's been badly put together.
Yes, it looks like yeah, its head is almost too big for its body, and the
Yes,
beak is chunkier. Like it doesn't
and
look like
far
it
too
should.
short. The bill is
Yes,
like way too short.
yeah, it does look like it's hit the ground, but unintentionally, and everything's just kind of been smooshed up into its. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
and it just spends its life on the ground, hopping around.
oh, that's
Yeah,
fantastic. But you can see, looking at the pictures of it, you can see the kingfisher of it.
yeah,
You can
yeah.
see it. It's just a very bizarre kingfisher. No, that's a good choice, and I think it's a fair one because like if someone in the UK said kingfisher, right, you'd picture the beautiful blue kind of thing that darts up and down and you barely get a glimpse of anywhere because it's moving too quickly. That though, this might I think that's dethroned the one that the UK audience will be familiar with. So yeah, especially if you're listening from the UK, go and Google that and then
I think so.
yeah,
They're also massive. I mean, it's more than
okay.
it's like 30 something centimeters long. I mean, they're big.
Oh,
They're big, chunky things. Yeah, yeah,
I like that.
yeah.
Good choice. Good choice. Is there? Have you? Had you encountered one before? No.
No, I've never seen it. I will probably in the next year or two. I'll go
Hmm.
over and see them. But they're quite hard to see. They I mean they call a lot at first light and then just kind of
Yeah.
stay silent, and you've basically got to try and bump into one, I think. But
Fair.
I'll go and see them at some point.
No, I think that's always the thing with kingfishers is they're always, to me, whenever I found one, it's always been an unexpected joy. So like I imagine
Yeah.
that's a family trait of like, okay, okay, you're odd, you're bizarre, and yeah, I remember there was what recently. There's a where I live. There's a little river or stream that runs through the town, and it's often heavily polluted. Like I remember growing up, it's always had trolleys and whatever in it. And I was walking along the other day, and it has gotten nicer over time. Like people have taken better care of it. But like I was walking along there the other day, and I thought someone genuinely thrown like a vape or something in like a bright blue, like just something just sat against a rock, and I was like, oh, what is like, ugh. And then it flew, and I was like, well, like, okay, and no one will believe me, no one will believe me, but I was like, there was, I'll probably never see it again, but it was there. Like I've not lost my mind because I was on a call with someone at the time, and I just went silent, and they were like, is something okay? I was like, I don't know what's just happened. So yeah,
I can believe that. I mean, kingfishers are remarkably. I mean, even no matter how polluted a river is, they do seem pretty good at. As long as there's fish in a bank, they're
yeah.
kind of fine. They're people think they're very precious. They're quite low maintenance, really. Kingfishers. They don't need very much.
No, they look. I think their problem is they look high maintenance. They look like I
Yeah,
feel
they
like there's
do.
a they fall into that category of kind of snooty looking birds where you're kind of like, yeah. That's also why I like this kookaburra. Like it doesn't it has that it's more real, more down to earth looking of the kingfisher.
It does. I always think if it was a person, it probably looks like it wouldn't be a very nice one. But I can
Mm,
kind of vibe with that. I think that's fine.
it's got a standoffishness to it, which
Yeah, it
yeah,
does. Yeah, yeah, I
like
like that.
and the fact that its eye is so much like its eye is out of proportion, so it's giving this in all of the pictures I'm seeing. It's giving some kind of judgy side eye. I'm kind of like, yeah, I like
Yeah,
this from you.
they have really massive eyes for the
Hmm.
size of their head. I assume because they're mostly active at dawn and dusk, so I assume that's why. But
Hmm.
um,
Oh, no,
yeah, they look cool.
that's a fabulous, interesting choice. So that is a good choice, and it's given us a spot to talk about kingfishers, which and kookaburras. These have never come up on the podcast before, never. So that's brilliant. Yeah, because a couple people we've had a couple repeats this series where people have said things that like
Oh, really?
and all birds. So people have said seagulls and as a general group,
Okay, okay,
and pigeons as a general again a general group, and
okay.
I've and those keep coming up as two, and I'm like I'm glad everyone is underappreciating them, but I'm glad
Oh,
as a
yeah.
bird
No,
person you didn't fall into those traps.
I took that in a very different direction and went very
Hmm.
obscure. There was a show.
Yes,
You're, I think, about the same age as me. Did you? When I was growing up, there was a show. It was called like Nick Baker's Weird Creatures or something.
I remember it, and as Jack Baker, no relation to Nick Baker, I should probably have been
Yes.
aware of it. But like,
It was a strange show, and it was endlessly ridiculed. It was on by particularly by Harry Hill's TV Burp because it was a very weird show in that Nick would pick an animal he wanted to see, and it would always be very remote and very obscure, like Lake Titicaca frog.
yeah.
And he
Hmm.
would, for about 58 minutes, he would fail to find it completely in a quest that was never made especially interesting. I'm sure it was, but the producers never did a particularly good job of selling it, and that's what Harry Hill always used to
Hmm.
take the mickey out of, was that half the footage was just of like cats and cows that were around him because
Hmm.
there was nothing really much else to film. And then in the last 2 or 3 minutes, he would come up with this
Mm.
amazing looking thing. I used to love that show. I can see why maybe it didn't take off. But anyway, I took it more in that direction of picking something
Hmm.
incredibly obscure
Yeah.
that people won't have heard of.
Maybe that's this whole episode is we've talked about things for 58 minutes just to seed something really bizarre at the end for them. So they stick the whole way through just to really like, yeah, that's what no, that's a good choice. That is a good choice. Now I need to go. I'm gonna as soon
And
as we're done,
sorry
I'm gonna have a search.
if Nick Baker does listen to this, I apologise. It was a great show, and I watched every episode of it.
No,
But yeah, Harry Hill used to endlessly take. I think it was every week there'd be some joke about it.
I'm gonna have to go back and find both the original documentary and the Harry Hill commentary on it.
Yeah, there
Yeah,
was he did one in the UK on basking sharks. I think I remember Lake Titicaca frog I
a
was
good
one of
one.
them.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, there was. I think it ran for 2 seasons.
I
But anyway,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
Like, yeah, if Nick Baker is listening, I can I pretend that I'm related to you because we have the same surname, and can I have a TV show now too, please? Like, just if you are, and yeah,
And you can go and look for kookaburras.
and go and look for kookaburras. There we go. Yeah, we'll bring it back. The next generation of bakers, even though we're not related. No, that is perfect. It is funny because I do have an uncle who's Nick Baker, but he's a dentist, so different. Like if you want like a cavity found or like braces put on, there's a TV show, but that's not going to fly anywhere. That is, we're going off now in such a
We're spiraling.
Yeah, we're spiraling, and I think that is the key for me to ask the final question, which is, having said all of this, having learned all of these things, having talked about all these amazing, interesting topics, if anyone wants to keep up to date with anything you or BirdLife are up to, where should they go? What should they look at? What should they follow? All these kind of questions. Yeah, what should they be doing?
Yeah, I am a terrible person to ask this question to because I abandoned Twitter with Musk. I don't
Yes.
really understand Blue Sky.
No.
I don't really understand LinkedIn. Despite your best efforts to try and follow me, you must have been very disappointed. But I mean, all my research is published on ResearchGate, so you can keep up with what I publish there. And otherwise, I suppose the best place to keep up to date with what BirdLife is doing more broadly is following BirdLife International on various socials. I assume we're on most of them. I don't really know, but it's a safe bet. Or if anyone is interested in, I guess, reaching out about any particular issue or is interested in collaborating on something, I'm kind of always interested in that kind of thing. You're welcome to email me. My email is just alex.berryman@birdlife.org.
Perfect. That's I think good. I will, and I can have to say, yeah, in the social media existence, that I don't know where we are anymore. I don't know who we're meant to be on, or what platforms, and which ones we're allowed to be on, and which ones we're not meant to be on. And I have also abandoned Twitter.
I was very sad abandoning Twitter. I used to really
Yeah.
like Twitter in that I thought it was, on the whole, quite nice, and it was very helpful as an academic, sort of publishing or trying spreading the word of your research. But it just has turned into a kind of death trap of horrid racism and homophobia. So
Yeah, and not for
yeah,
Pride Month. We're not doing that this month. No,
no.
no. So, no, it's yeah, no. But yes, so I will put links to all of those things in the description of this episode. So the website, the kind of social medias for BirdLife, anything else will be in the description of this episode, so people can go and find all of that there. I will also put links to all of our social media. So we are at Pangolin Podcast on everything, and I am at the only Jack Baker on Instagram. And yeah, I'm on LinkedIn and everywhere else. So just have a search. You can find me there as well. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast, leave us a nice review. Because yes, next episode will be our final episode of this year's Pangolin Pride celebration. And we'll be joined once again, by CJ Greco, host of the Birdie Bunch podcast, who will be here to tell us all about their work creating inclusive spaces at the Lincoln Park Zoo. So it's really, really interesting. Love CJ. They were here for the Christmas special. They were brilliant. And now we're bringing them back out for Pride because they only ever come out for special occasions for me. And I'm very excited to have them. Yeah. And so, with all of that being said, the final thing that I have to say to you, Alex, is of course a huge, huge thank you for your time today. It's been absolutely fascinating. I feel like I've learned a lot, which is brilliant. And yeah, I know everyone will have loved hearing all of the interesting stories, especially that kookaburra. I think is going to stick with me for a long time. So thank you so much for all of that. And yeah, it's been brilliant.
Oh, thanks for having me.
No, it's genuinely fantastic. And yes, with all of that being said, thank you so much to everyone who's listening for tuning in. I look forward to seeing you all next time. And until next time, happy Pride Month and goodbye.